The wedding is the most lavish event in New York, yet Isla, the young millionaire bride, wears a face as cold as ice. Standing opposite her is Caleb, a man in a cheap, rented tuxedo, holding the hand of his small, frightened daughter. As the priest speaks, Isla glances at her cheating ex-boyfriend laughing in the front row. She says, "I do," with a defiant clarity. The crowd whispers, "She is mad. A millionaire marrying a poor electrician with a child just for revenge?" Isla takes Caleb's rough hand, feeling a steady strength she never found in high society. She has no idea this revenge marriage will make her the happiest woman in the world. Before we see who Caleb truly is and how he silences the world, let me know where you are watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support these unexpected new beginnings. The rain in Manhattan felt like needles of ice, matching the cold fury radiating from Isla Vance as she stared at the invitation on her mahogany desk. It was an announcement for the wedding of the year. The man she had loved for 3 years was marrying a rival heiress just 2 months after their bitter breakup. To the world, Isla was a self-made millionaire, a woman of steel who had built an empire from nothing. But in the quiet of her glass office, she felt like a crumbling monument. Her grandfather's will was a ticking clock. Marry within 30 days or lose the controlling interest in the company she had bled for. She didn't need love. She needed a weapon. She needed a man who was invisible, someone the world would look at and see only a shadow, allowing her to keep her crown while spitting in the face of the man who had discarded her like yesterday's news. The lights flickered and then died, plunging the office into darkness. A heavy sigh echoed from the hallway, followed by the clanking of metal tools. "I am sorry, ma'am. The transformer in the basement is older than I am," a deep, steady voice called out. Isla stepped into the hallway, the moonlight reflecting off her silk dress. There, kneeling by an open electrical panel, was a man who looked like he belonged to a different century. Caleb was a mountain of a man, his shoulders broad and corded with muscle, his face etched with a weariness that went deeper than bone. Beside him, sitting on a toolbox and clutching a tattered teddy bear, was a little girl with large, soulful eyes named Daisy. Isla watched as Caleb worked with a terrifying, silent efficiency. His hands, though scarred and stained with grease, moved with the precision of a surgeon. He didn't look like a man who fixed wires for a living. He looked like a king who had lost his kingdom and was now wandering the ruins. "How much for the repair?" Isla asked, her voice sharp and transactional. Caleb didn't look up. $60 for the labor. But if you want it to stay fixed, you need a new system. I can patch it for tonight, but I can't work miracles without parts. "I am not interested in patches, Caleb," Isla said, walking closer until she was standing directly over him. She saw the hospital bracelet tucked under his sleeve, and the way he looked at his daughter with a desperate, aching protection. She did her research in a heartbeat. Caleb was a single father, a widower drowning in medical debt for a daughter who needed a heart procedure he could never afford. "I have a different kind of miracle in mind," Isla continued, her eyes narrowing. She pulled a folded document from her pocket, a prenuptial agreement she had drafted in a fever of spite. "I need a husband for 12 months. No intimacy, no shared lives. You will attend 4 events a month at my side. You will look at me as if I am the center of your universe, especially when my ex-boyfriend is in the room." Caleb finally looked at her. His eyes were a piercing, intelligent blue, stripped of all pretension. "And what do I get in exchange for my dignity, Ms. Vance?" $2 million. $1 million tonight to pay for Daisy's surgery, and the second $1 million when the divorce papers are signed in a year. You and your daughter will live in the west wing of my estate. You will be provided for, but you will remain a ghost in my world. Caleb looked at Daisy, who was shivering in the drafty hallway. He looked at his calloused hands, the hands of a man who worked 16 hours a day and still couldn't save his child. The silence in the hallway was heavy with the weight of a father's soul. "I don't care about the money for myself," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly rasp. "But my daughter gets the best doctors. Not tomorrow. Tonight." "Done," Isla snapped. 2 days later, the world stood still. The St. Patrick's Cathedral was filled with the scent of lilies and the hushed whispers of the elite. Isla walked down the aisle, her face a mask of beautiful, terrifying stone. Beside her stood Caleb, wearing a rented tuxedo that struggled to contain his massive frame. He looked like a wolf in a sheep's skin, out of place yet strangely commanding. As they reached the altar, Isla caught the eye of her ex-boyfriend Julian, sitting in the third row. He was smirking, whispering to his new fiancée about the charity project Isla had picked up from the gutter. Isla didn't flinch. She took Caleb's hand, a hand that was rough, warm, and unshakable. When she said, "I do," she wasn't looking at the priest. She was looking at the man she had hired to be her shield, realizing for the first time that while she had married him for revenge, the strength in his grip felt more real than any diamond she had ever worn. The crowd laughed, mocking the millionaire and the mechanic. But as the rings were exchanged, the first crack in Isla's icy heart began to form. The Vance estate was a masterpiece of cold marble and echoing corridors, a place designed to impress guests rather than comfort inhabitants. For the first 2 weeks, Isla treated Caleb and Daisy like ghosts haunted by a contract. She stayed in the East Wing, buried under mountains of paperwork, while they occupied the West. She had given them a home, but she had not given them a welcome. To Isla, Caleb was a transaction, a temporary solution to a permanent pride. However, Caleb was not a man who knew how to be idle. While Isla spent her nights staring at glowing screens, Caleb was busy. He didn't ask for permission. He simply noticed the things that were broken in a house that was too rich to care. He fixed the groaning floorboards in the library that had annoyed Isla for years. He replaced the flickering vintage chandeliers with a warm, steady light that didn't strain the eyes. He didn't use her money for contractors. He used his own worn tool belt, working in a silence that was more profound than any conversation. The first crack in Isla's icy exterior didn't come from Caleb, but from the smallest member of the household. One evening, after a grueling 14-hour day, Isla collapsed onto the velvet sofa in the main lounge. Her head throbbed, and the silence of the mansion felt suffocating. Suddenly, a soft pattering of feet broke the quiet. Daisy appeared, clutching her tattered teddy bear. She didn't look at Isla with the fawning eyes of an employee or the calculating gaze of a socialite. She looked at her with the pure, uncomplicated curiosity of a child. "Mama Isla?" Daisy whispered. The word hit Isla like a physical blow. No one had ever called her that. "Are your eyes hurting? My daddy says when eyes hurt, it means the heart is tired." Before Isla could find a sharp word to dismiss her, Daisy climbed onto the sofa and placed a small, cool hand on Isla's forehead. "I have a magic sticker for you," she said, pressing a brightly colored dinosaur sticker onto Isla's temple. "Now the tired will go away." Isla froze. For the first time in years, someone was taking care of her without wanting a signature or a wire transfer in return. She looked at the little girl, whose heart was beating stronger every day thanks to the surgery Isla had funded, and felt a strange, terrifying warmth bloom in her chest. That night, the tired didn't just go away. It was replaced by a fever. The stress of the merger and the emotional toll of the wedding finally broke Isla's body. She shivered under her silk sheets, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She reached for her phone to call her private doctor, but her fingers were too weak to grip the device. She expected to wake up in a sterile hospital room. Instead, she woke up to the smell of cedarwood and chicken broth. Caleb was sitting in a chair by her bed, his large frame looking absurdly out of place in her delicate feminine room. He was paring an apple with a small knife, his movements steady and calm. "Your doctor wanted to take you to the clinic," Caleb said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. But Daisy told him that magic soup was better. "I told him I'd watch you through the night. Your fever broke 2 hours ago." Isla tried to sit up, but Caleb gently pressed her back down with one hand. "Eat first, Isla. You've been running on adrenaline and spite for too long. Your body is on strike." He didn't call her Ms. Vance. He didn't look at her like she was a millionaire. He looked at her like she was a person, broken, exhausted, and human. He fed her the soup, spoonful by spoonful. It was a recipe from his grandmother, filled with herbs and a kind of care that Isla hadn't experienced since she was a child. "Why are you doing this, Caleb?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's not in the contract. You already have the money for Daisy. You don't have to be kind to me." Caleb paused, the spoon hovering in the air. He looked at her, and for a moment the rugged mechanic disappeared, replaced by a man of immense depth and sorrow. "Money pays for surgeries, Isla. It doesn't pay for a soul. You think you bought a husband to win a war against your ex, but you're the one who's been living in a fortress of your own making. I'm not doing this for the contract. I'm doing this because no one should have to be sick in a house this big, all by themselves." Over the following weeks, the dynamic shifted. Isla began to leave her office earlier. She found herself in the kitchen, watching Caleb teach Daisy how to make pancakes. She started to laugh, a real melodic sound that surprised even her. She began to appear in public, not with the grim, determined face of a woman seeking revenge, but with a genuine radiance. When she walked down Fifth Avenue with Caleb, she didn't care if people whispered about his flannel shirts or his rough hands. She found herself leaning into him, not for the cameras, but because his strength was the only thing that felt solid in her shifting world. Isla Vance, the woman who had everything, was starting to realize that her revenge was backfiring in the most beautiful way possible. She had set out to make Julian jealous, but she was ending up making herself happy. Behind the closed doors of the mansion, the contract was becoming a distant memory, replaced by the soft laughter of a child and the quiet, protective presence of a man who saw the woman behind the millions. The annual Autumn Gala was the apex of New York's social calendar, a glittering shark tank where reputation was the only currency. Isla stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, her hand tucked into the crook of Caleb's arm. She wore a gown of midnight velvet, but all eyes were on the man beside her. Caleb looked striking in a custom-tailored tuxedo. Isla had insisted on the best, but he wore the expensive fabric with the same casual indifference he wore his work flannel. He didn't look like a pretender. He looked like a king who had simply forgotten his crown in the car. "Just remember," Isla whispered, her breath hitching as Julian, her ex-boyfriend, approached them with a smirk. "Stay close. Don't let him see you're uncomfortable." "Isla," Caleb replied, his voice a low, grounding rumble. "I've faced high-voltage transformers in the dark. A man in a silk tie isn't going to make me blink." Julian arrived, his eyes scanning Caleb with blatant mockery. "Isla, darling, I see you've brought your technician. Tell me, Caleb, is the wine here up to the standards of your usual beer and wings diet? Or are you finding the conversation a bit too technical for someone who spends his day stripping wires?" A few socialites nearby snickered behind their fans. Isla's grip on Caleb's arm tightened, her temper flaring. But before she could lash out, Caleb stepped forward. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "Technically," Caleb said, his voice carrying with a sudden sharp authority that silenced the surrounding group. "The conversation tonight is lackluster. I've heard 3 people discuss the new Vance Aerospace merger, and not one of them has accounted for the secondary thermal dissipation flaws in the Mark 10 engine. They're projecting profits on a machine that will fail its stress test in 6 months if the alloy isn't reinforced with a titanium carbon weave." The circle of onlookers went dead silent. Julian blinked, his smirk faltering. "What did you say?" "I said your math is off, Julian," Caleb continued, his eyes turning into 2 pieces of cold blue glass. "And if you're the one advising the board on this acquisition, you're about to lose your investors $50 million. Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife needs a drink that matches her intellect, not this conversation." As they walked away, Isla felt as if she were floating. She led him to a secluded balcony overlooking the city lights, the cool air hitting her heated face. She turned to him, her eyes wide with shock. "Caleb, what was that? How do you know about thermal dissipation? That project is top secret. Even my board is still struggling with the alloy ratios." Caleb sighed, leaning his large frame against the stone railing. He looked out at the skyline, the shadows lengthening across his face. "I wasn't always an electrician, Isla. 10 years ago, I was the chief systems engineer for the Helios Group. I designed the foundations for the engines your company is trying to buy today." Isla gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The Helios Group? You're the Sea Thorn? The visionary who disappeared after the patent wars? Everyone thought you were a myth, or that you'd been bought out by a foreign government." "I wasn't bought out," Caleb said, his voice tinged with a deep, ancient sorrow. "I was betrayed. My partner sold the safety protocols to a rival to cut costs. When I protested, they staged an accident in the lab. My wife was there that day, Isla. She was my lead researcher. She died in the explosion because they chose a cheaper alloy over human lives." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavier than the New York humidity. Isla felt a tear prick at her eye. She finally understood the weariness in his gaze, the reason he had hidden himself in a basement with a toolbox. He wasn't running from work. He was running from a world that had stolen his heart and his conscience. "I gave up everything," Caleb continued. "The patents, the fame, the money. I took Daisy and I vanished. I promised her I'd never build another machine that could hurt someone. I became an electrician because wires don't lie. If you connect them right, the light comes on. It's simple. It's honest." Isla reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched his cheek. "And the surgery for Daisy? Why didn't you use your old connections?" "I had no one left to trust," he whispered. "Until you walked into that hallway and offered me a deal born of spite. I took it for her, but I didn't expect—" He trailed off, his eyes searching hers. "You didn't expect what?" Isla asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I didn't expect the woman behind the $1 million contract to be just as lonely as I was," Caleb said softly. In that moment, the gala, the revenge, and the millions of dollars vanished. There was only a man who had lost his world, and a woman who had tried to buy one. Isla realized that Caleb hadn't just saved her reputation. He had been protecting her all along. He had been fixing her house, her light, and her life with the same genius he had once used to touch the stars. The following weeks were a whirlwind of secret discovery. They spent nights in the library, not avoiding each other, but huddled over blueprints. Caleb helped Isla identify the hidden traps in her merger, showing her how to strengthen her company without sacrificing safety. He became her secret weapon, her silent partner, and her greatest confidant. Daisy began to thrive, her laughter filling the once silent mansion. She spent her afternoons in Isla's office, drawing pictures of Mama Isla and Daddy on the back of multi-million-dollar contracts. Isla found herself buying toys instead of stocks and planning weekend trips to the zoo instead of board meetings. They were no longer partners in a contract. They were a team. Isla helped Caleb find his voice again, encouraging him to file for the patents he had lost, while Caleb helped Isla find her heart, showing her that a life built on vengeance is just a gilded cage. One evening, as they sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by Daisy's building blocks, Caleb looked at Isla. "The year is almost halfway over, Isla. What happens when the contract ends?" Isla looked at the dinosaur sticker still stuck to the corner of her laptop, a gift from Daisy. She looked at Caleb, the man who had fixed her soul with his rough, honest hands. "I think," she said, her voice steady and full of a new kind of power, "that I'm ready to stop pretending. I don't want to spite my ex anymore, Caleb. I want to build something that Julian could never understand. I want to build a life." But the peace was short-lived. Julian, humiliated and vengeful, had been digging into Caleb's past. He was about to launch an attack that would threaten everything they had built, not knowing that the poor electrician was about to become his worst nightmare. The atmosphere in the Vance International boardroom was thick with the scent of impending doom. Outside, the New York sky was a bruised purple, reflecting the storm brewing within the glass walls. Isla sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped tightly, watching as her board of directors whispered in panicked tones. On the monitors, the stock price was a jagged red line plummeting towards zero. Julian, her ex-boyfriend, had struck with a calculated cruelty. He hadn't just attacked her company. He had leaked a doctored dossier to the press, claiming that Ela had married a fraudulent mechanic to launder money and hide a failing aerospace project. The scandal was a wildfire, and the investors were screaming for blood. The doors to the boardroom swung open, and Julian walked in, looking smug in a tailored navy suit. He wasn't invited, but he held enough proxy votes from frightened shareholders to force his way in. "Isla, darling," Julian said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "The game is up. Your technician husband is a ghost with no record, and your company is a sinking ship. Sign the merger over to my group now, and I might be able to save you from a prison cell for fraud. It's a generous offer for a woman who lost her mind over a man who fixes light bulbs." Isla felt a cold shiver of fear, but she didn't look at Julian. She looked at the empty chair beside her. Caleb was supposed to be there, but he had disappeared 3 hours ago, leaving only a note that said, "Trust the process." "The project isn't failing, Julian," Isla said, her voice trembling but defiant. "The math is sound." "The math is a fantasy," Julian shouted, slamming a folder onto the table. "You don't have the patents, you don't have the lead engineer, you have nothing but a rented husband and a failing legacy." "Actually," a deep, resonant voice interrupted from the doorway, "she has everything." Every head in the room turned. Caleb stepped inside, but he was no longer the man in the flannel shirt. He wore a charcoal suit that fit his massive frame with a lethal elegance. Behind him stood a team of the most prestigious intellectual property lawyers in the country. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like a weapon in his hand. Julian burst into laughter. "What is this? A costume party? You can put a suit on a wolf, Isla, but it's still a beast. Someone call security and get this laborer out of here." "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Julian," Caleb said, walking slowly to the center of the room. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at the board of directors. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single, ancient-looking document with a gold seal. "My name is Caleb Thorne. 10 years ago, I was the chief systems engineer of the Helios Group. And this is the master patent for the thermal dissipation technology your entire merger is built upon." The room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Julian's face turned from a triumphant red to a sickly, pale white. "That's impossible. Thorne is dead. The patents were lost in the explosion." "The explosion was a crime," Caleb countered, his voice like grinding stones. "And while I was dead to the world, I was busy. I spent the last 5 years tracking the digital footprints of the men who cut those corners. Men like your father, Julian. And men like you, who used stolen data to build this fraudulent merger." Caleb turned to the lead board member. "I have just purchased 30% of the available Vance International shares on the open market during the morning panic. I am now the largest individual shareholder. And as my first act, I am placing an injunction on the merger. We aren't selling. We are suing." He threw a second folder onto the table, a thick stack of internal emails and bank transfers that linked Julian's group to the original lab sabotage. "You didn't just try to steal a company, Julian," Caleb said, stepping into the man's personal space. The raw power he had shown in the desert and the boat was now channeled into a cold, corporate execution. "You tried to destroy the woman I love to cover up your father's murders. You thought I was a third dien? You were right. I'm here to cut the power to your entire life." Julian staggered back, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Security guards, who had entered to remove Caleb, now turned toward Julian as Caleb's lawyers handed them the legal warrants. "This is a lie." "Isla, tell them." Isla stood up, her eyes bright with tears of pride and a fierce newfound strength. She walked over to Caleb, slipping her hand into his rough, warm palm closed over hers, an unshakable anchor. "Julian," Isla said, her voice clear and ringing through the room. "You told me once that I would be nothing without you. But you forgot one thing. I am a Vance, and I have a husband who doesn't just fix wires. He fixes the world. Get him out of my sight." As Julian was escorted out in handcuffs, the board members began to stand, their faces filled with a mixture of shock and desperate respect. They began to applaud, but Caleb and Isla didn't hear them. They were looking at each other. "You stayed," Isla whispered, her voice breaking. "You didn't have to do all this. You could have just taken the money and Daisy and run." Caleb reached out, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "I married you to save my daughter, Isla, but I stayed because I couldn't let the world dim your light. I'm not a ghost in your world anymore. I'm the man standing right beside you." "The contract," Isla started. Caleb reached into his jacket, pulled out the original marriage agreement, and tore it in half without taking his eyes off her. The pieces of paper drifted to the boardroom floor like snow. "The contract is over, Isla. I don't want your millions. I want your Mondays. I want your mornings. I want to be the man who fixes the house while you build the empire." In the wreckage of the corporate war, Isla realized she had won much more than a company. She had found a man who was a genius in the lab and a hero in the dark. The poor electrician had saved her, not with a check, but with a soul that was worth more than all the gold in New York. The penthouse overlooking Central Park was once a monument to Isla's solitude, a glass cage where she counted her successes in silence. But today, the clinical quiet has been replaced by the chaotic, beautiful symphony of a home. Sunlight streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating not just the expensive art, but the scattered building blocks on the rug, and the faint, sweet smell of blueberry pancakes wafting from the kitchen. Isla stands by the window, watching the city below. The headlines about the Thorne-Vance merger have long since faded, replaced by stories of their foundation's breakthroughs in clean energy. She is no longer the ice millionaire the tabloids used to fear. There is a softness in her eyes and a relaxed grace in her posture that no amount of money could have bought. She looks down at the dinosaur sticker still affixed to the corner of her mahogany desk, a permanent reminder of the day her world changed. Caleb walks into the room, his presence as steady and grounding as ever. He is dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, his sleeves rolled up to reveal the hands that have built empires and fixed broken toys with equal care. He doesn't look like the billionaire investor who saved the company. He looks like a man who has finally found his peace. "The garden project is finished," Caleb says, sliding his arms around Isla's waist from behind. He rests his chin on her shoulder, his warmth radiating through her silk blouse. Daisy is currently trying to convince the new roses to grow faster by singing to them. Isla leans back into his strength, covering his hands with hers. "I never thought I'd see the day when my boardroom would be less important than a rose garden, Caleb. You really did ruin my reputation as a shark." Caleb chuckles, a low, rich sound that vibrates against her back. "I didn't ruin it, Isla. I just gave the shark a reason to swim in warmer waters." He turns her around to face him, his expression turning serious yet infinitely tender. "The 1-year anniversary of our contract is tomorrow. Technically, we should be signing the final papers." Isla looks at the man who stepped out of the shadows to become her shield. She thinks of the night in the hallway, the magic soup, and the way he stood before the board to claim her as his own. She reaches up, her fingers tracing the jawline she has come to adore. "I think I'm going to sue you for breach of contract, Caleb Thorne," she whispers, a playful spark in her eyes. "The agreement said you would be a ghost, but you've occupied every room in my house and every corner of my heart. There is no Isla Vance without Caleb and Daisy anymore." Caleb smiles, leaning down to press his forehead against hers. "Good, because I tore up those papers months ago. I'm not here because of a deal, Isla. I'm here because I love you." Outside on the terrace, Daisy's laughter rings out, clear and bright. Isla smiles, realizing that her quest for revenge had been the luckiest mistake of her life. She had married a stranger to spite her past, only to find the man who would build her future. "Thank you," Isla whispers into the quiet of the room. "Thank you for walking into my life when I only wanted to get even, and teaching me how to love all over again." As the sun sets over the Manhattan skyline, painting the world in gold, the millionaire and the genius stand together. They are no longer defined by what they lost, but by what they found in each other. The contract is gone, and in its place is a life that is finally, truly real. Sometimes the person we choose to spite our past is the very soul meant to build our future. Isla and Caleb's journey shows us that love isn't found in a contract, but in the quiet moments of protection and truth. If you believe that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, please hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts below. Thank you for being part of this beautiful story.